is Shannon Williams Mitchum, and I, along with Derek Lee, am the co-chair of the Education Supercluster. Welcome to our third event in our Digital Blueprint event series. And during this episode, we're going to be discussing innovations in workforce development. Just to let you know a little bit about the Education Supercluster, we are part of the Global City Teams Challenge, which is administered by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is my employer. And it's designed to gather and share knowledge to improve the quality of life of cities and communities through the effective deployment of smart technologies. Our group has hosted several conversations with some wonderful change makers who've made tremendous strides and impacts in the regions that they live in throughout the US and globally. And during our last event, we had the pleasure of speaking with Beth Yoke, who is the Chief Strategic Officer at the Public Library in Cincinnati, to discuss the important role of libraries in our digital economy. Today, we're planning on discussing the topic of innovation and workforce development with our guest, Jewyl Clarke, an integrated curriculum coordinator for the San Diego County Office of Education. And the discussion will be hosted by two of our esteemed members, Derek Lee, who's the CEO of Pilot City, and Jason Ebner, a lead career technical educator at Antioch High School. And I'll also be jumping in to ask questions and facilitate question and answers from our leadership team who is listening in. And with that, I'll hand off the rest of the discussion to Jason and Derek to introduce our guest, Jewyl.
I want to introduce everybody to Ms. Jewyl Clarke from the San Diego County Office of Education. And the first thing I need to do on a personal note is thank Jewyl, because as we started this school year, a lot of us teachers were very confused. We weren't sure what to do. Spring had not gone the way we wanted it to, and obviously it wasn't going to through the pandemic. And Ms. Clarke came through, and the San Diego County Office of Education, her team came through with a groundbreaking online professional development that helped a lot of us career technical educators connect with each other. And I think they got a lot more interest than they counted on. So first of all, Ms. Clarke, thank you very much from myself and many of my fellow CTE teachers for facilitating this and making this year a lot more bearable than we thought it was going to be. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for that.
Absolutely. It has been really a interesting year, obviously, for everyone. But we have been able to leverage the virtual interactions in order to support teachers in a way that they have never had before. And so, it's been really exciting to see people from across the state and even across the country engage meaningfully in collaboration. When in the past, if you're familiar with CTE, we have 15 different industry sectors, somewhere around like 58 different CTE pathways, each of which has tons of classes. So often people are left to their own devices to do everything. And so this has been a great chance to connect someone who is the only person who teaches what they teach at their site or their district or maybe even their region with other people who teach the same thing and give them the power to collaborate in our virtual environment. So I'm so glad, Jason, that we connected that way. And I'm very excited to talk with you all about some of the things that we've been doing and some of the hopes we have as we go forward.
So along those lines, I'm pretty sure there are people who would like to recreate this in their own districts and around their own schools. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be. How did you guys go from the spring to realizing that this was a necessity, and how did you guys put this together?
Well, I think the first thing was in the spring, I hosted some just sector collaboration meetings, and I had, a meeting for each of the 15 industry sectors. So CTE is kind of divided in, you have, the health and medical science sector, or the engineering and architecture sector, or, so all of, just like the rest of the world has industries, then we have classes in each of these. So I'd host a meeting for all the folks who teach that particular class to just or in that sector to come together and talk about common problems of practice. So then as we were looking at the summer and really trying to think about, like, how does a teacher plan for the fall? And I have to support all of these pathways. And although my background is helping to begin a medical pathway, I taught medical chemistry. And so it's a very narrow, although I know a lot about a lot of things, I don't know enough to support all of these teachers with their content development. So I said, instead of me trying to support everyone, why don't I give them a forum where they can work collaboratively? Because when I was as a teacher, professional learning communities were so powerful in helping us work smarter and not harder. And so this was an opportunity to develop a statewide professional learning community for teachers to engage. And so I happen to also be on the statewide team for California for CTE distance learning. And so as I've been helping put out the state newsletter every month, I just said, well, if I'm going to do this for my region, why don't I just put it in the newsletter, because it helps the folks that I'm hands-on working with in San Diego County, and I know this is a national audience. So in California, you have counties, but each county has all these different districts. So my county office of ed supports 42 school districts and over 150 charters. We have 500,000 students here in San Diego County, which actually beats out over 20 states for how many students we support in our county alone, right? So, while we're having this, it's like, okay, if I can give my teachers someone else to collaborate with, that's powerful. We put it in the newsletter. At the time, I wasn't even sure what mechanism I would do. So it's just a Google form to like say, would you be interested? What would you, which sector? Suddenly I had like 1,600 people signed up for these things across like a 2-week window where I'd have a 3-hour meeting in the morning and a 3-hour meeting in the evening. Um, and so what I had to do is find a way for teachers to organize. So I asked teachers to take on a role of being a champion teacher for their pathway. And so I had a little training, and champion teachers would come and I could talk through the template side created for their conversations. And ultimately, well, like the first meeting, the template was way too complicated. Delete half of it out, right? And then you go forward. But if you're looking to replicate something like this, I think there's so much power in stepping back. And as educators, we are used to knowing all the things, but saying like, I'm here to facilitate. I'm not here to make demands of my teachers. I'm here to respect our teachers as professionals, give them the space to talk about the things that are important to them. And then empower that information to be shared with a bigger group. So that's really the approach that I took. And if you're looking to do something similarly, it's really about creating opportunities for people to connect, but don't stress yourself about like running every single meeting, because they're experts in their own right. If I gave a group of teachers a classroom, they would sit together and they'd just start talking. So Zoom breakouts, that was enough, and it was great. So thank you.
I had the pleasure to actually attend it.
Oh, great.
I don't know exactly how I found out about it. I think it was actually through Alameda County Office of Education, but I came to some, and I was impressed because there was all these different educators running these Zoom breakouts, right? And so I guess my question for you is like, what's the magic sauce that you added to get 1,600 people? Like, how did you aggregate so many people? Because that's the hardest part of civic engagement, and having them not feel like they're burnt out at that point, and take initiative and learn new things and go and connect with people. How did you get that initial momentum rolling?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure you're designing something that meets their needs. And so, we saw that people were frustrated and they were like, I don't know what I'm going to do on the first day back. And I think systemically, we saw that school districts were like, it'll probably work itself out. I guess by this fall we'll be in class. So the investment in just what the plan would be just wasn't necessarily there for most teachers. So they came, and this is the crazy thing. The last week of July and the first week of August, this is on their summer break. This is like a 3-hour meeting. And I tell you, like, there were so many groups at 3 hours, I would come in and say like, hey, everybody, like, I'm not going to cut you off. Like, if you want to keep going, great. But just so you know, like, the end time is here if you had other plans. And I had groups who went like another hour or more. And so I think it's about knowing your audience and understanding, like, is this something that they need? Because if you build it, they will come, as we all know, is not necessarily the truth, right? So the first thing, I think, just like any design thinking mentality, it's like that empathy work. Like, how do you connect with your stakeholders and build out, like, okay, I saw that everyone was like, what, I just don't know what to teach. So, and someone asked in the Q&A about sharing templates, and I'll be happy to share some of the templates that I put together. And in fact, everything that we did is crowdsourced. And so everything is public, it's open, people can go in and look at it later. If you couldn't attend, it's still linked in our documents. And so basically, I had a few different ways. You could either plan by the semester and had, like, like, here's some units, and like work together on building out resources for your units. Or you could just have a discussion, and there was like discussion information that goes with the discussion. There were templates around like what your favorite resources were. And there was also a place for people to share their contact information, because as much as I'd like to run these every week, like, I don't have time for that. A lot of our stakeholders don't have time for that, but I do want them to be empowered to continue the conversation on their own. And so that was another piece of the puzzle, is making sure that they had the power to do that. So I think that's, it's knowing what people need. And right now, it's not for me to talk at them. Like, they are getting a lot of that in their district. They're getting a lot of that in all they can sign up for. Next week, I'm doing a webinar on career pathway recruitment and marketing, right? Like, that's a venue where they're going to sit and get. But this was really focused on collaboration. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of our professional development in general, is we think that things are like, we don't trust the people in the field to be the experts in the things that they're doing enough. And so I think that's actually one of the most powerful things. And distributed leadership, that's how I got my start, when I was in the classroom and I was given, like, a little bit of power, not like the negative kind of power, but like the kind of power that says, like, oh, I have responsibility now, like, I'm going to run this part of a meeting. And so by distributing that leadership and giving the title of lead teacher, or champion teacher, I called it, to different people, then they stepped in and they kind of like nudged people along in the conversation. And so I think that's a piece of the puzzle, is how do you develop a distributed leadership team so that 1,600 people each have a facilitated conversation. Yeah.
You said something that struck home for me, is number one, yes, I do agree that not many of us teachers are looked at as true professionals who are can do what we set out to do. Like, we know our jobs very well. And also to the fact that you said working smarter, not harder. How do you feel that you can better facilitate? Because the other issue, where I'm going with this is that as teacher champions, we could bring more of our fellow teachers, our academic teachers, out of their silos and bring them into the fold to do project-based learning, to allow teachers to work smarter, not harder. How do you respond to that? How would you encourage people to be able to do that, to let the champion teacher bring the teachers out of their silos and really lead them in project-based learning and show them how it will make their job easier?
Yeah, I think the first thing, one of the biggest barriers, I think, to teachers doing some of this collaborative work, or like when you get into actual project-based learning, is we are used to working in silos. We have a classroom. No one ever sees what we're doing. We are the king of our castle, the queen of our castle. And it's the only reason people walk into our class sometimes is for accountability. And so we have a culture where it's not okay to be vulnerable, oftentimes in education, right? Like, if somebody's watching you, it's because you're doing something wrong. And so all of a sudden, also, we don't go into each other's classrooms. So we don't we don't always know the norm. We don't know what expectations are. And so when you put teachers together collaboratively, they're hard pressed to talk about like their needs and like where they struggle because we don't have these conversations in like a meaningful way. I think actually with the pandemic, everyone's struggling. So it's okay to struggle. We can talk
Yeah.
about our struggles. And it's
Yes.
funny, like when I first did the collaboration meetings and still when I do them, the conversations are not about like, oh, how do I teach this specific standard? The conversations are, how do we engage students? And this is not a new conversation. This is a conversation that goes back 100 years in classrooms, right? It's just we have a new mechanism for engagement. And so it's okay to ask the hard questions. Also, engagement is much lower than we've really, it's like really different where like a kid who's not engaged in your classroom versus a kid who's not engaged in your Zoom room. Um, that might be that they're not even logging in, whereas at least they're like logging in if they're sitting in front of you. It doesn't mean that their mind is on the activity, but I think if we're really thinking about how to address things as a group, first we have to model for teachers like, all right, here are my challenges, and open those conversations up. When it comes into project-based learning, and that's like its own, my title is the integrated curriculum coordinator. I am really all about how do we like integrate the work, and so our students aren't working in silos, just like our industries don't live in silos outside of the classroom. um, the biggest hindrance is actually time. To do really intentional project-based learning that is interdisciplinary, you have to give those teachers time to work together on a weekly basis, and those kinds of meaningful things. So again, it comes down to the collaborative needs as we go. It also, to be honest, if we're talking about like one of the bigger barriers to some of this work is teachers don't understand. Um, they don't understand how what they're teaching applies in the
Right.
world outside of school.
Yes.
CTE instructors, they to get that CTE credential, you actually have to have industry experience. So they know that side. They may not know all the teaching pedagogy because they came from industry. They kind of like, now I'm an engineering teacher, and they're kind of learning as they go. Their credentialing program is different than a core academic teacher. But as a core academic teacher, to know how your subject applies, like you've been in school since you were 4 and you went to school. So it's
Mhm.
also about how do we give teachers experiences that are authentic so that their students can have experiences that are authentic. And so as we
Mhm.
talk about, like, I know you know you all are talking about like smart cities and things like that in your bigger movement. Like these cities, they are full of, like San Diego, we have an innovation economy that's incredible. Like we have people at the forefront of biotech, of technology, of so many industries here in San Diego, but our teachers have no idea how the things they have to teach by the standards actually fit in our innovation economy. And so one of the big things that I think I've always seen being the biggest impact on teachers is to give them authentic experiences. And in in that, they will give every student they have for the rest of their life a more authentic learning experience.
Cool. I'd like to intercept this because this is the work that I do personally, but also, um, do you think that this place that we're in right now, where education's system essentially has an opportunity, it's completely, not completely, but it's blown up to some extent, right? But there's an opportunity to kind of recreate what that actually is and have more flex time and have more opportunities for students to be, out in the afternoons, going having internships or pre-apprenticeship programs, or going actually outside, enjoying the city as a school itself, right? Where do you find opportunity around that in intersecting with the innovation economy and having students understand the urgency, right, of the opportunities around them, specifically in California, given we have so many great economies locally?
Yeah, I think one actually kind of low hanging fruit, if you would, is to work with industry to identify the challenges they're facing and give our students opportunities to address them in their classroom. So one of the things that I like, so I have this whole thing about finding your purpose and your ikigai. It's a Japanese term for reason for being, and helping our students like kind of figure out where they're going. Because historically, what do we say? We ask them, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Man, that is an anxiety inducing question. And it is not the right question. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to shift it. We want to say, what problems do you want to solve when you grow up? And what career opportunities might be part of that. And you can see on the screen right here, Derek's pulling up this concept of ikigai. It's like where what you love, what the world needs, what you can get paid for, and what you are good at, where those all intersect. And so when our students are given opportunities in school through things like project-based learning, right? Jason's talking about PBL. If
Mhm.
we can give them driving questions that are aligned with industries driving questions, now if every year they even addressed one or two things that we're trying to address in the bigger scheme of the world, then they grow up and they're like, oh, I know what kinds of things, what problems the world is trying to solve. I will say, actually, one of the great places to start is the UN Sustainability Goals. So they have this whole list of just really succinct needs for our world. And so if you're kind of at a loss, or you're a general education teacher, or if you're a community partner who works on one of these and you want to step in and work with a school, that's one place to start. Um, I actually do this talk at conferences around creating a design jam. So it's, you do like a rapid prototyping 1-day event. And I actually did a real one with our a local industry partner, Comic-Con. So I don't know if you've heard of this tiny little conference that happens every year in San Diego.
I used to go every year for like 20 years. So yeah, I know it well.
Yeah. So Comic-Con is a huge part of our community, and they're actually opening a museum here in San Diego in Balboa Park, in the heart of our like our big museum and park space. So I've been very involved actually in that project. So I was able to bring in a group of students, and I worked with the Comic-Con Museum, and we identified 10 different challenges that they're trying to face in opening the museum. We made 10 groups of students. Each group of students addressed one of those challenges. They had a mentor from either from Comic-Con or from another partner who was part of, like, the architect came in. Like, one of the things was that they can't change the facade because Balboa Park was built. It's a historic park. It was built for like the 1919. I don't think it's the World's Fair, but one of those big international fairs. Um, and so we can't change the facade. So how do you make it feel like the Comic-Con museum without changing the actual architecture of the outside, right? So they worked with an actual architect. They had all these ideas, like things about like projection and plants and stuff, right? So here we give students real industry challenges, access to industry, and an opportunity to have meaningful engagement with those challenges. That's something we did that in 1 day, and we used the design thinking process, and like very fun 1 day quick activity. We'd planned another one at the around environmental concerns with our the safari park in San Diego, part of the San Diego Zoo, which is also, we're really lucky because we have some pretty amazing partners here. But unfortunately, that was last April during Earth Day. So clearly by then we were all distance learning. But as we look at these opportunities to give students authentic opportunities to address challenges, when they get to graduation, they like might have said like, oh, this is the thing that I want to go towards. So I think it's really important to give them authentic experiences that are industry driven, and that's going to help them to know what they're excited and passionate and what they want to do more of.
So a lot of what you said is what a lot of people in the audience probably remember as vocational education, and we are referring to it as career technical education. So for some people, there's a gap. Like where did vocational education end, and where did CTE pick up? Do you mind talking about that from your experience, that gap that we see in education?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like historically, you might remember ROP or Voc Ed, and you're like, oh, yeah, they're like a wood shop out in the parking lot. Maybe home ec. There were a lot of these programs. Well, we have had a significant change to really looking at it as workforce development. And so Standards have been rewritten, aligned with workforce needs. We bring in advisory committees from our local industry partners who help with the curriculum and purchasing decisions in CTE programs. And so, career technical education, and we've talked about it a little bit, but it's basically you have really designated these different industry sectors, and we build programs where students have 2 or more years of sequenced courses. And so if I'm going to enter an engineering pathway, then in my high school, course of study, I'm going to take all the regular classes. And we really want our students to also be in California, we call it A through G, which is the minimum requirements to get into our CSU and UC schools. I think historically one of the problems was back in 1920s when they built the education systems for those really divided into the intellectual side and the technical side, and like we're going to have these two tracks. And I think we still suffer from a lot of these old school notions of thinking that this is a one or the other when we talk about college and career. College and career readiness is for every student. And I think one of the things that I believe is all students are career bound. All right. If our end goal is for our students to go to more school, then what is the point of school, right? If our students, like whether they're going to finish in high school, whether they're going to finish after a 2-year college, after a 4-year college, after a doctorate, like at the end of this educational journey, where are they going? Right? And so no matter what the students' life goals are, we need to instill in them the skills that they need to succeed in our innovation economy. We need to show them the career opportunities that they have. A lot of this is at the foundation an equity issue, right? Our students see the careers that exist in the communities they're in. And we know that a lot of students are bundled in socioeconomic communities or communities based on their background. And what we want them to see is that they have informed decisions around, like, just because you don't know anyone who is an engineer or in a technology field or who works in a lab, that doesn't mean that's not right for you, right? I think
Mhm.
it's really important too that, like, I don't know, we sometimes we pretend like money doesn't matter. And if we go back to that, the circles on the ikigai sphere, and one is like what you can get paid for. Like, we have a lot of students who are like, yeah, when I grow up, I'm going to buy a house. And you're like, with what?
Yeah.
I live in San Diego. It is a lot of money to get into buying your own house or even to rent, right? And so what we want our students to have is the power to make informed decisions. We
Mhm.
want them to be aware of the cost of living, and then know, like, all right, well then what is your vision of what your future should look like, and like what careers are going to support you in both feeling like the work that you do is meaningful but also allow you to have the life that you want. And I think in school a lot of times like, oh, pick whatever you want because like it doesn't matter. And even like kids who are like a 4-year degree, they're going on to get a 4-year degree or beyond, we don't give them the knowledge to make an informed decision. I don't know if you've ever had a friend who's like, I majored in psychology and then I found out afterwards that there are no jobs with an undergraduate degree in psychology.
Um, I'd like to jump in. I mean, I studied architecture and I'm now in education in smart cities. We'll see where that went. It's interesting because I being studying architecture and then going education, I learned a lot of new things that I didn't know about education, right? And you hear these things like college or career, right? And you kind of start to see that there really isn't a vision there, right? I mean, there isn't really an understanding that makes logical sense there. Everyone obviously goes somewhere towards career, and maybe we built in a system early that prioritized college because it was a new thing with a new business with a new opportunity to produce talent, in particular industries. But now when we live in the gig economy, when we live in an environment where everyone has different opportunities through platforms and apps online and to create their own business, and be on Shopify, to be on Etsy, to do all these things, we start to realize that perhaps our system currently is becoming irrelevant in certain areas, right? And we need to iron out the kinks in which we have built into our bureaucratic systems or legacy systems that really do need to actually be I mean, I think people recognize it, like yourself, right? And that's the beauty of, I think, having people like Jason and yourself actually going in there and actually, stretching it all out, right? So just wanted to acknowledge that and highlight that with a marker, right? As people look at what we need to do, right? To reformat what needs to be recreated to some extent.
Well, I think that it's interesting too that you go back to your degree, and we all end up like somehow talking about our degree, and we have given students this false notion too that like you do well in high school, you do well in college, and you get a career. And I'll do this exercise every time I get teachers together, and I just have them they chart out their own career path from when they were 15, what did you want to be when you were 15, and what are you now, and what was your career path, what did it look like? And then we talk about how our career paths are all very wiggly, right? They don't follow that direct, do well in high school, do well in college, and you get a career. We have movement in our career, and so that's one of the things. Like, how do we even change that question further? And we say, what problems do you want to solve first? Acknowledging that our career trajectory changes over time. But I also think it's helpful to get, and one of the roles that CTE plays is to give students experiences early on. So when I was in 3rd grade, decided I was going to be a pediatric cardiologist. I had a sister with a heart problem. So, we are what we see. And I spent a lot of time in hospitals when she was having surgeries and all of those things. So I grow up and I go to college and I'm a biochem major and I'm going to be a pediatric cardiologist. Well, because I had that connection to my sister's cardiologist, I got to do an internship one summer in pediatric cardiology. It was amazing. I was at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital, which is at Stanford University. So probably one of the most preeminent places in the world with some of the best pediatric cardiologists in the world. And I got invited to see open heart surgery on a 6-year-old. And when they put her on bypass, I passed out. I fell to the floor. Like, doctors who should be caring for a 6-year-old whose heart is open are like, wake up, it's okay, to me, right? And that is one of the pieces of the experience was incredible. But I left going, I don't think this is for me. But I was already 2 years into an undergraduate degree. And so I just kept doing it because so I graduated with a degree in biology chemistry, had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I was lucky because I put my resume on like monster.com, which was a, job finding site back in the day. And I got a call from High Tech High, which is a pretty well-known charter school system.
Know it well.
Yeah. And so they like, and then actually I went to an interview for the next fall, like in January, and they had a teacher who quit a week later and they were like, hey, do you want to start teaching right now? So like, I went from like, what am I going to do with my life to like, oh, I'm a teacher, literally in a weekend. So, so, our career paths are wild. But I tell you that story in part to say, if we can move those internship experiences earlier, if we can give our students opportunities to experience the world of work at a younger age and to see all of their options and not just like, oh, I'm going to be a pediatric cardiologist because like I love to be like the most premier of something, and that's the most premier thing I've ever seen anyone be in my existence, right? And so like here I am, and I love science, so like don't get me wrong, I love that stuff. I actually, like I said, I taught medical chemistry in high school and built the curriculum that's used in medical chemistry. So I use that medical know-how. I have a master's in pharmaceutical chemistry because I was just that's my interest, right? So but when we get into our students' experience, before they have paid multiple years of tuition, where changing their major at that point is like, well, that's gonna add a whole nother year to my costs of undergraduate, right? We need to get that kind of experience into their high schools so that they can make an informed decision when they leave and they're gonna start spending money and time on their education. And they know which direction is they might not know. Many of us on this call probably are still like, I don't know what's next, right? But we want to empower our students to have that informed decision making.
Yeah, I'm sitting here smiling, and people in the audience are probably saying that what's Ebner doing, and I'm smiling because we have people on this panel who are saying things and reinforcing things that I'm getting my master's degree in career technical education, because I started as a social science teacher, went into career technical education and found my calling, right? And just to spit some numbers at you guys in the audience, is 30% of the students who actually make it through college, and the numbers are actually dismal from that point, but 30% of students get through college and actually use their degree. And what Jewyl is saying is something that I'm hoping a lot of our people in the audience are hearing, is that we have to really restructure how students proceed through education. And one thing that I sparked to in what you said, Jewyl, is helping. My daughter told me that she wants to be a doctor, and my fiance wanted to be a doctor, and for the same common reason. They want to help people. Imagine being able to, as you said before, tell a student, don't focus on what you want to be. Focus on the problems you want to solve. And you have 50% of those kids in class raising their hands saying, I want to help people. What would that classroom look like? What would the pedagogy look like if the focus was that, not just learning on basically chosen for you curriculum that you hope that the students are find engaging, but actual meaningful, hey, you're going to have this lesson to enhance and learn better on how to help people. I'm imagining this and I'm smiling, I'm euphoric, but we do have to change those systems. In your estimation, where do we start? And how do we get that ball rolling?
Well, I think we can take this from a few different places. I think one thing is acknowledging and recognizing that we want our students to be able to have that wiggly career path, and so if we can provide them with an education that builds what we call essential skills, or a lot of people call soft skills, that actually is supporting them no matter what career they go in. They can fit in every class as well. So it can fit in your English class and in your automotive class, and any class in between. And so helping students understand, a lot of times we call them kind of like the 4 C's, like creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and then some other pieces around workplace readiness and professionalism. We look at things like your ability to manage your own time. We actually worked with the San Diego Workforce Partnership, which is our local workforce investment board in San Diego, to develop a whole set of tools to help teachers integrate those essential skills in their classrooms. And so we can also share that. It's cte.innovatesd.org/essential skills is the place. We have a rubric for each one. We have reflections for students to use. And so that's a really great way to give students a foundation, because I'll tell you, we have career panels all of the time. And when we have a career panel, it's not actually about the technical skills. Like, our industry partners are quick to say, we need people who can work with other people. If you're teaching, and here's another, I like to explain it like this as well. If you have like, let's say you're doing a class on programming and you're going to teach a programming language, right? In 6 to 8 years, by the time a high school student makes it through whatever education and they're in a career, like, what's the likelihood that that same programming language is going to be in common use, right? Those are things that they develop new ones all the time. If you teach that same student 2 or 3 different programming languages and help them identify, where is it used? Why is it used? What's the difference? Like, why would I use one over the other? Well, and they understand it's the same as learning languages, right? They understand kind of the root of each of these and when you would use them. Then when they get into industry, they're like, hey, let's look at a new language. What does it do? How can I use it? How can I put this to play, right? So those are the kinds of pieces of the puzzle when we think about critical thinking, and we think about empowering our students on a technical side, where we can have a lot of power over their future. But even giving students, like, I don't know, like put them, these scrum teams are really like a big thing in tech, and you can have like a scrum master who meets with the teacher that leads their team. So instead of saying like, oh, team A and team B, you could say like scrum team A and scrum team B, send your scrum master to me, so you can use the language of industry to kind of replicate what you're already doing, but it helps your students feel like, oh, like being in a team isn't just something I'm going to do in high school, that the rest of their life they will be more empowered to understand that teamwork is great. And then someday I'll just circle it all the way back, they're invited to the CTE collaboration group, and they're like, great, I can be the champion teacher, I've been a scrum leader before, right? So how do we empower people so that when they do get into industry, they've had these meaningful opportunities, just like with teachers giving that distributed leadership, giving that in your classroom is really important. Give your students roles and tasks. And I'm trying to remember what the prompt is that I'm talking to. So I hope I answered the question. I just get passionate about things and talk forever.
But Jewyl, this has been a wonderful discussion so far. I do want to see if we can integrate some of the questions that have been coming up in the chat into it as well. And what you've been describing so far, Jewyl, is amazing. Like really, it's probably really difficult from your perspective to balance the need to create those foundational skill sets for students that are transferable across industries, while also exposing them to jobs that are relevant and making sure that they're prepared for just understanding, all of the lingo and different things within these new industries that are like growing in their local areas.
And don't forget, they now need to be ready for state testing too, right? Like we have all these authentic things that are needed,
right.
But what drives like a lot of administrative choices is none of these. So anyway, that's a side challenge.
That's actually another question I want to ask, but let me go to the audience. So what probably complicates that even more is the view of parents and what their view of what their child should be educated on is. So the question that Debbie is asking is, how do you work with parents to ensure that children are able to pursue their desired vocation? And for these parents who are really insistent on making sure their child is prepared for college exclusively?
This is a great question. And I actually work a lot with counselors on developing a program of study for CTE programs. So a CTE program is going to be a minimum of 2 years. And so ideally what you do is you look at, if I had a student who was entering high school who wanted to be in the architecture program, what would all their classes look like? And then you show the parents, look, they're going to meet all their A through G. What we do is we make sure also that CTE classes now, you can apply for A through G approval for CTE classes, which means in California, each of those letters has a designation for, like, if the math, the science, the English, the social science, right? Each letter has a different thing. So some CTE programs can actually be approved as a D-level lab science. And so that might meet their lab requirement for college entry. If I'm doing a biotech lab, I mean, that is definitely an advanced science course. We also see some, particularly in our arts, media, and entertainment, meeting the fine arts requirement for college. And so one thing is to make sure that it is shown that a student who takes these classes is not being tracked away from going to college. It is a piece of the puzzle in getting to college. And the others should be considered electives because you are required a certain amount of electives to get in. The other thing that I do is I have them build out, like, okay, here are your CTE classes and here's where it goes. And so what we really work on is making sure there's alignment to post-secondary. So if I'm going to take these courses, then at the 2-year college, here's where we recommend you go. At the 4-year college, here are some of the programs in our region that would be a great fit for you. So then when a parent sees this, they're like, oh, kids who go here, they're going straight into the UCSD architecture program or engineering program, as well as some students might be going to our 2-year colleges, which have phenomenal programs for workforce development. And after 2 years, students have the ability to get a higher wage job many times than undergraduate students because they have skills, which our undergraduate programs don't always have a very strong skills focus, right? We actually have students who graduate from UCSD like in the biology chemistry fields, but they don't have that many labs under their belt. They'll come back to the community college to take this introductory biotech class so that they get the hands-on like technical skills they need to get the jobs in our biotech industry. Guess what? We have that same class in many of our high schools in the region, so they're getting that same certification on how to use all the equipment and how to do things. But a lot of the universities, they may not have the equipment to scale the labs for every student to the level that they need to be competitive in industry. So it's complicated if that makes sense. But I think one of the big things is to help parents know we are here to help your students make an informed decision. And if I had my soapbox, it would be that every student has the academics to pick any future, has the experiences to help them know which future is best for them, and then has the skills so that when they do enter that place that they're strong. And so one of the nice things about essential skills, if we go back to that, is they are great for college too. I mean, this is not just essential skills of the world of work, but this is also, time management. uh yeah, college, you need to manage your time, right?
Yeah.
So these are all things that go across all of these. But I agree, like we see this not only in our parents, we see these in our administrators and the other teachers on our sites. When we talk about career technical education, a big piece is building an understanding behind all of these other stakeholders in our system, and giving a voice to our students and our parents to say like which programs are right for them. Well, we also share labor market information. I mean, like I used to be like, oh, labor market, that sounds boring. Now I'm like, ooh, the new report's coming out next week. Like sometimes I'll get like a preview on a report and I'm like, oh, I'm so special. It's so exciting. I can read this before anyone else. Derek, you mentioned the gig economy earlier. We have a whole labor market report on the gig economy here in San Diego. It's huge. Just
And
look at the lobbying and the amount of money that was poured into, I think it was Prop 22 here in California, which was about
21
like Uber and Lyft and
Yep.
how they were going to be treated as employees or private contractors and things like that. It is billions of dollars, and we need our students to be able to navigate that as well.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to get back to the Q&A, but also want to kind of twist it up a little bit because Jason's always been kind of evangelizing this, and this has kind of folded into my thinking now. But when we talk about parents, and we certainly talk more about entrepreneurship and what the future of that is, as it relates to economies, right? But and micro entrepreneurship too, which is really the gig economy as a prototype, right? But Jason always talked about we need to reskill our parents. And sometimes I'm finding that it's really not the students, the students are defined by their parents too and their caretakers. And so if their family is not encouraging a particular high growth path or encouraging further study, then how do we change generations, right? And it's such a visionary, like Antioch Unified School District, the big campus, bring on parents to be students in the school, just have communities itself, schools become community centers for parent reskilling and to prepare for this automation future. The first, God, when I first met you, Jason, I think someone sent me your YouTube where it said, what was it again?
The implosion of the education system based on the fact that people were sending their students to a 13-year education program that when they were leaving the education program, they were not prepared. I mean, I tell my students right now, if they are going on a traditional track, they are probably facing 2, if not 4 years of extra training that they're going to most likely have to pay for themselves. which means that our education systems on a whole are not doing what they're supposed to do. Is what we've been preaching right now, what you've been preaching right now, is how do we take care of this? And the reskilling of adults is very big on that, because obviously it gives our students a great opportunity to teach what they're learning in their classrooms. And I always say there's no learning without application. What a greatest application of being able to learn during the day and apply it, and then have the opportunity to teach adults in the evening and possibly get paid to be that champion teacher of those topics, to make sure that more than just the young generation is prepared, but those facing jobs or job elimination have somewhere to go in their community to be able to fortify their skills and to be able to re-enter the workforce bigger and greater than before.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think on a small scale, I had a colleague who taught biotech, and every year he had a day where the parents came in and the students walked them through a biotech activity. So on a small scale, without really any new programming, that was a very easy way to involve parents in, and they just did a DNA extraction, which is something that is, if you haven't done it, it's an easy thing. You need just mostly household products, and but it helped give our students a moment of being the experts. And like, isn't high school where all of a sudden, like, your kids could become smarter than you in something, right? Like, how do we let that happen? Like, as a teacher, that that's where project-based learning gets really scary, because you have to, instead of being the expert on everything, you have to be the expert on knowing when they probably didn't do it right, and you got to fact check, right? So but I really love thinking of it as a bigger community. To be honest, when we are talking about workforce development, it is not just in the high schools. The Strong Workforce Initiative, which is California wide, is actually through the community colleges. And so many of our CTE funds here are issued from the community college for programs and making sure there's alignment. But those post-secondary programs at the community colleges are not just for our recent grads, right? They're for every age group. And there's a lot of talk of how do we not only educate our students, but help our parents see those opportunities for upskilling. And I think now more than ever, upskilling is, we're seeing huge changes in our economy, and we have no idea the implications of the changes that we're seeing on long-term jobs and what jobs look like in the future. But we have had to upskill people very quickly. I don't know if any of you have colleagues who were like, I don't understand Zoom, and like most of them are on board by now. And so how do we upskill both our parents and also our teachers? Again, teachers are so isolated. They don't have time to be vulnerable. When I became a resource teacher at my high school, we were just adopting iPads. And this one teacher comes to me and he's like, I don't know what to do with these iPads. Can we meet? So we set up every Tuesday right after school. I'd pop by his classroom and he'd have some questions for me. And I thought about iPad use. First thing he says, like, so somebody sent me a document in email. How do I take it out of the email and type in it and then email it back? And this was maybe 5 years ago. It was actually a really momentous moment for me to realize that never had this teacher been given the opportunity to say they didn't know. And they never felt a safe place to ask that question. And like, even though I was like, oh, we're in trouble here, I felt so honored that he felt like he could ask me these questions. And so we have a full teaching force who's now trying to virtual teach, and maybe a couple of years ago couldn't download something out of an email. And so I think, how do we then teach them what the innovation economy is and what our students need? Again, it comes down to experience. You've got to bring parents and teachers into all of these like work-based learning experiences. I think someone in the questions talked about bring your parent to school day is as much as for the teachers as it is for the students. And that is absolutely true, right? How do we also leverage our parent community for their industry expertise? and upskill everyone along the way. So, if we have industry on campus and there's opportunity to include parents and other teachers, open those doors. It's really important.
Specifically, what I've been finding, and Jason, this is a model that I'm thinking of too, that we could implement, is with communities that where their families and parents and caretakers could use upskilling and reskilling. Let's do that, right? Let's do that. For the communities that are a little more affluent or more well off or have careers that are in good trajectories in high growth industries like computer science or engineering or STEAM or STEM, let's get those students in work-based learning programs too, but let's work with their parents to become employers in our programs entirely, right? And
Yeah.
that's what we're finding in our programs is that our interns, some of them who are a little more affluent, a little more better, more set up, their parents work for Uber and Lyft and Facebook and Apple and so we can recruit them up and then have them do kind of a one for one model of kind of like the Tom's model of give
Yeah.
your students in your school an opportunity, give students in schools who could really use an opportunity, and have that reciprocation system be built, so that we're recycling everybody. We're not just shunning this, shunning that, or giving this, giving that. We're actually using the whole ecosystem to build a community, where all resources are used.
True.
Yeah, I think it's complicated because every piece of that community, the funding and the administration lives in separate silos. So
Yes.
I think somebody in the Q&A asked about opportunities in CTE for including intergenerational learning. And I think that's the challenge is we don't have common metrics. And so, like every single thing in the world is all about competing priorities and what wins, right? So if I'm an administrator in these different systems, there has to be like a synergy towards our common goals in order for these to work. So I do see like students within a system working with each other. And actually, it's been really fun because I've seen some schools send their high school students to be a Zoom guest speaker at their middle schools right now. So,
Mm.
so like it's like, oh, there's someone else on the screen. Like the interaction is different, and it also helps like with that awareness and like the recruitment and marketing side of CTE. Like send your CTE kids to be a guest speaker at the middle school. That middle school teacher's like, great, I have like something else that's maybe engaging and different today. And then it helps, it's all about informed decision making. It helps the middle schoolers see those programs. We do often pull from our parent pools when we're looking for people to be in our advisory groups or to come and be a guest speaker. But it's not always as systemically done as well as it could be. And the risk of that is also an equity issue, right? That's that whole, oh, wow, well, the rich school's got like a bunch of engineers talking and like, hey, like how do we get someone to this rural school in the mountains of like on like that has a bunch of students from the reservation, and like and so the equity gaps continue to grow too when we only depend on parents. But if we can also look at that and say like, all right, well then my strategic partnerships with industry, I'm gonna send them in a certain place because this school's got it taken care of. And so it's also about deploying resources strategically, and helping with that. So I think intergenerational learning is amazing. And I've heard of like one cool thing. There's a continuation school in our county that has a garden, but they were told that they cannot sell the things they garden because they don't have it certified in a certain way, blah, blah, blah. So they figured out a partnership with a local retirement community where they grew all of the different plants. And so every week they do a delivery to this retirement community. And so then they were working with those seniors, and then their English classes were looking at, I think NPR has like a whole series where you there's like interviews with people and their life experiences. So their English class was going to try to replicate that and work with those same seniors where they give the free produce, and then also go through this process of really like connecting with those people about their life experiences. So now and then you see opportunities for intergenerational learning, but guess what? that's project-based learning. That was all part of a bigger, um, uh, they were working on a bigger goal for what does it mean to be self-sufficient. That was their driving question of the project-based learning stuff I was working with them on. And so, those gardens are self-sufficient, right? They grow, they feed, they grow, they feed, and like talking to the folks there about, what does it mean to be self-sufficient in life? And so anyway, so there are beautiful examples, but I think just like in all of education, anecdotes versus scalable change are really different. And so how do we find these high points, and then find ways to replicate and to scale? And I don't have the answer, but I
It's a
think
difficult
opportunities
question.
like this are part of that puzzle, right? Like I will talk all day about CTE because I want other people to understand and have the urgency behind this. So anyone who's listening out there who's in industry, if you have not connected with your local school system, put that on your to-do list. Find out how you can impact the students in your community, both at your kids' school and at any other school in your region that may need that kind of support. So uh, I'll take that moment as a personal call to each of you listening.
And I was just going to ask you that question because tomorrow, because of this, it gets out there and suddenly you have 16 calls from 16 different industry partners who want to set something up with you and your schools. Does that complicate your job or make your job easier? And explain why.
Great. So I'm really lucky because here in San Diego County, our superintendent has really supported what we call work-based learning. So work-based learning is anywhere that industry is connected to our students. And so we actually have a team who provides work-based learning experiences, and our districts can request things from them. When industry reaches out, it's amazing because we are doing cold calls and reaching out all the time. And so it's basically having kind of a menu of options so that when they call, you know how to deploy them. And so it could be, we do a lot of student events. So we'll bring students from a lot of different schools together, and have panels and have breakouts so that they can learn from industry that way. That's been actually one of the best ways that we can do bigger regional work. So we can have, okay, small potatoes, you're a guest speaker or on a panel. And when you work with industry, this is not a one and done. You say, I want to be a partner with you. I'd love to have you every year at this event, right? Because that sets you up to not have to do a cold call every year. So if you're out there trying to do this work, that's a piece of the puzzle. But you're like, okay, and then we need people who will take students on tours of their facility. Would you be willing to do that? We need people who will take interns at their facility. Would you be willing to do that? And so you kind of start having a menu. One push, there's a kind of a push that's like the 1% movement, and it was about help encouraging industry to give 1% of time, money, other resources. There were like 3 or 4 different things, and really trying to engage them and being thoughtful when it comes to corporate social responsibility. All right. I get so frustrated because we have these big tech companies in our county, and they'll do these contracts with a CSR organization. So that if you don't know this, like big corporate entities, they'll contract with somebody for their corporate social responsibility. So if I work for a company like Qualcomm, I might have like 2 or 3 days a year, part of my contract, that I can interact with people outside, for like, and just ditch work for the day and go do something. So all of a sudden they're going to like the beach and doing a beach cleanup. And like beach cleanups are great. We have a lot of beaches here, but like I have a Qualcomm engineer who wants to take a day off work to do something for the community. Like, could I get you to come to the school instead? Or can our school come and beach clean up next to you and you can chit chat about engineering while you're out there picking up, garbage? And so I think it's also about strategic engagement of our industry partners in this work. Uh, San Diego is easy for people to find employees because it's a really nice place to live. So we don't have the level of philanthropy and corporate social responsibility you actually see in other places. but you have to come beside them and say, how does this impact like your end game of hiring people from within? And we know that it might cost you money to engage with us, and time is money and all of these things, but that the benefits outweigh other things. So again, it's about helping people see the vision and be on the vision with you along the way.
So let's talk about a couple of realities, because I do want to say this, and I'm not sure how much time we actually have left here, but I don't want this to end on this, but I think we have to realize that we have a lot of districts who their focus is narrow. Their teachers are not necessarily on board or don't even know about what we're talking about. They don't have a Jewyl Clarke who is sitting there telling them that this is a path that will benefit students the most. How, if we have people listening right now, how do we get those people, those superintendents, those teachers like myself, or people that are in your position in their district, how do they start to get things moving in the direction? How do they become part of like a championship organization that you definitely are making San Diego and the County Office of Education sound like right now? How do we get everybody on board with this?
Well, like we talked about earlier, it's all about competing priorities. And the way that pretty much any organization um, lifts a priority up is there's two different reasons. One is accountability, and the other is money, right? And so in order for this work to beat out all of the other wonderful things that you could be doing with your time in your district, we have to have systems in place that incentivize this work. And so in California, we actually see an increase in when we switch to our new California State dashboard. We have a college and career indicator, and their CTE program completion, post-secondary credits. Like a lot of our programs give college credit as part of their CTE program. Things like, and now they're starting to look at how they might incorporate internships and other work-based learning experiences in future iterations of the dashboard. And so all of a sudden, I get calls from administrators all over, like, what's CTE and how do I do it? And so that's very exciting. I think the other side of it is then they're like, and how do I pay for it? Because if you're doing an automotive program and you want to make it clean and green so that our students can work on Teslas and other green technology that's coming out, like it's not cheap. And so luckily, those workforce development funds coming from things like Strong Workforce Initiative and from CTE Incentive Grant, those come out, those are in California, but those are part of the budget every year. And we need support from our elected officials to continue to make policy that supports workforce development all the way through. And I'm not just talking about high school, like in kindergarten, we see kids who are already, if you say draw like a pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer, they will draw white males. And
Yes.
like we have to change this. We do. Change it. So we can't wait till they're in high school, and we can't just, and now the new federal rewrite of the Perkins Act, when they did that recently, the funds can be used down to 5th grade instead of 7th grade. And so as we see how our state rewrites that work, we may be able to get a little bit of funds a little bit earlier, but there's a lot of earmarks for, and I don't know if earmarks is the right word, but there's a lot of limitations or restrictions. So you can only use it on CTE credentialed teachers, which you don't have at the elementary level. So, this is the big picture. And when it comes down to the conversations with them, I always go to Ikigai, like we talked about earlier. That was actually something I not came up with, because I saw the graphic that Derek shared, and I was like, this is my way to get to the general people. Because when I speak at a conference and I say career, oh, that's not me, is the response I get from so many teachers. When I say, oh, let's help students find their purpose, they flock. And then they're like, okay, yeah. So this could work in schools, but what about my child? And all of a sudden they have this urgency, but it's about their own kid. And I want to be like, can we please have that urgency for every student that you've ever met? And so, I think helping helping people see the bigger vision of giving our students the power, the knowledge, and the skills to pick any career. That's where we start getting them on board.
Jewyl, I just wanted to ask, though, from a policy standpoint, I would imagine that, so you're putting in these frameworks in place to make sure CTE is implemented in schools, accountability, incentivization, and all that. But I wonder if another consideration would be like evaluating the programs in general. So if you're thinking about ways to scale, right, and selling it to, policymakers and whomever, holds the purse strings, how are you evaluating the effectiveness of these programs so that you can tell that story based on actual, data?
Well, each school does have to go through a self-study as part of their CTE incentive grant application. And so part of it is, in order to be eligible for those funds, you actually have to go through those self-studies and also have goals that are aligned to your needs and the needs of your populations. So I think that's a piece of it. We had the 11 elements of a high quality pathway. It's now 12 design principles, I think, that just got approved in the last few months behind high quality pathways. And so in California, we do have a lot of guidance. Also, the crazy thing is, I'll work with teachers on PBL, and like the English teacher will go like, but it's so hard for me to connect with the engineering teacher. They can teach whatever they want. And I was like, that we have standards that they're also having to teach to, right? And so there's this like weird thought that like, oh, if you teach automotive, you do whatever you want out there in the shop. But like, we do have standards for all of our classes. Again, like creating course descriptions that meet the requirements of our UC and CSU systems here in California are part of that puzzle. And so there are some mechanisms for quality improvement. I think one of the biggest problems, though, is that our leadership in CTE, all they have time for is grants and reporting.
True.
The way that we're funded right now,
True.
there are 3 to 4 grant cycles a year. Right now, we're reporting on 6 to 8 different grants at any given time because they overlap. The different reporting mechanisms and systems. And so whoever has the CTE hat, they do not have time to do high quality program improvement, because the way that CTE is structured, we have to hire grant managers, not instructional leaders.
That's true.
So I think, like that is another whole piece of the puzzle where I'm lucky to be in a role where I do a lot of instructional support. And many times these teachers, they come out of industry, we give them a job, they do credentialing like online, and then good luck. And so there's definitely, I can't say that every program is awesome. I walk into programs and I cringe just like I would in any class, right? There's classes in every subject that don't meet my quality wishes and dreams. But, I think things like right now where teachers are finally talking to each other, these bigger sector collaborations that are virtual. So like a teacher like up in Shasta County and a teacher in San Diego County, it would be like a 12-hour drive. I mean, California's very large, if you don't know, 12 to 15 hours between these two schools. And now they're talking about their lesson plans, and they're feeling less alone. So I'm hopeful that also will increase quality when people start seeing, like, getting excited, like, oh, like I could do that. That sounds awesome. And so,
not to mention having students from other districts be able to present at others' classrooms outside.
Yes, I want that. I want that. Absolutely.
yeah.
So a lot to unpack with what you just said. And there's something that I've been actually told this. I've actually been told that my class is too chaotic. How could there be learning going on when your class is so chaotic? And I think that's where that idea comes from, is the engineering teacher can do whatever they want. The automotive teacher can do whatever they want. It's not that. It's that with engineering and automotive, there is choice. And in that choice, you have to be okay with chaos. You have to be okay with kids focusing on what they want to focus on at that current time, because that's where the real learning happens. If you're having a class run on Ikigai, you're going to have a chaotic class. You're not going to have teachers all on, you're not going to have students all on the same page at the same time. And I think that's where that misconception comes from, is because we all were brought into education with order, cemetery rows, everybody on the same page at the same time, reading the same documents, yada, yada, yada. But when you go from that milieu into a CTE classroom, it is chaos. I mean, I experienced it myself going from a history teacher to CTE, and it probably took me 2 years to get over that. And in some ways, I want academic teachers to actually feel it, because once you get through that chaos, suddenly you see real learning happen, you see real application happen, and it gets exciting, and it almost becomes like a drug, you know. And I would love to see more academic. I'm not sure if you have, I mean, you yourself as an academic teacher kind of saw that. I mean, you got to tell us about how, to what extent did you go to actually give your students that real experience in your classroom? You shared it with Derek and I wanted you to share that story. That was really cool.
Yeah, and I don't know which I have so many stories, but
no, the one where you actually went to go become, you actually went to teach your kids real pharmacy work. You actually
yeah. So yeah, I think there's great ways to give students opportunities to do the work themselves, and I think, you know, when you talk about the chaos factor, it's also like teachers letting go of being in control, and to learn project management techniques, and there's some great resources from the Project Management Institute's Educational Foundation at PMIEF.something.com or org, but anyway, for project management, so that, like, okay, I have, like, yeah, it looks like chaos, but it's because this team's doing that, and this team's doing this, and this team's doing the other thing, because I think there is a lot of chaos in CTE. It's not always great, but I mean, same with in regular classrooms. And when an administrator walks into a CTE classroom, they're like, I have no idea what's happening. So we do need a way to translate. And that's actually been one of the projects on my back burner around, like, how do we help empower administrators to do walkthroughs in CTE, where they can be meaningful, right? Like, you don't need to know chemistry to give me meaningful feedback as a chemistry teacher. So why do you need to know automotive to give meaningful feedback to an automotive teacher? But I think the idea of organized chaos is a really important thing, because it also means that we have to let go of a little bit of control and actually have what everyone's like, student-centered classroom. And then all of a sudden they walk into a student-centered classroom and they're like, I don't know what to do here. Goodbye. You know? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I think there's some ways to do it. I had a cool activity when I taught medical chemistry, and students, they each designed their own calorimeter. All right. So I wanted to do this whole, like, design. It's like, okay, our goal, I can't just give kids free for all, like, access to chemicals. So, like, we can't be quite as open-ended in chemistry as in many classes for safety reasons. It's like, all right, well, I'm going to let them design their apparatus. And we talked about what the goals are. And then they had, like, financial restrictions, like every inch of tape was, like, you know, $1 or whatever. And then they had to make it under this much money in their little activity. And so, but instead of, it's more than an activity, because what they did is they designed a calorimeter, and then we used it in all of our labs that required a calorimeter. And then they understood, like, what we were doing in the lab, because they knew that. I think another place is, like, you know, if you want to do like a titration, like, we can compare efficacy of, like, aspirin that has been left open, one that's expired, one that's brand new, one that's extra, by how much titrant that is able to interact with it and neutralize. And so that now they actually understand what they're doing, because they're like, oh, it took a lot less to neutralize this one that's expired. So, like, that means that the compound is no longer effective, right? So there are some cool things that you can do there. I also like to switch it up. And when I taught biology at one point, instead of doing a pre-lab, and I did this actually throughout, instead of doing a pre-lab, I'd have them write a grant application. So it's like, all right, here is the scenario. Here's your, like, RFA with the whatever it is, and then they had to write a grant application that said what their experiment was, what equipment they needed, all these things, and then we'd go through an approval process where they could improve on it if they needed to, and then once they met the requirements, then they were given a grant of the equipment and supplies needed to do the lab. And so it actually made it really meaningful for them to be really thoughtful about it ahead of time, because as a scientist you have to be thoughtful about it ahead of time. In education we write a lot of grants. You have to really think about what you're going to do before you can do it. And so just little scenario swaps where you make something more authentic can make a real difference in the classroom, and it doesn't take like the amount of change that you might think it should.
And I would agree with that. And I actually would agree with that. So if you had a go-to source, like one go-to source for somebody in the audience to just sit there and say, I need to start now. Like, I really want to get this. I want to get people going. Where would you send them? Where would you send them as your one go-to source that you have when people come to you and say, hey, how do you do this CTE thing? Where would you send them?
So we do have a website, which we're like, it's not been around for too long, so we continually are adding to it. cte.innovatesd.org. We actually have a whole page of like kind of COVID-19 strategies for CTE. We have crowdsourced documents by sector, so it's a place for teachers to go in, so you can kind of see my madness, but you can also engage in it yourself and be part of it, and add your thoughts to it. And so we've been doing a ton of different activities and student events. So this would be where kind of our public face. So if you're trying to get a better feel for what we're doing right now, this might be helpful for you and your organization. You can also reach out to me and shoot me an email. And like, wow, like I'm like, oh, could that be overwhelming? Like, wouldn't that be awesome if it was overwhelming, because that many people are super excited. But Jewyl.Clarke@sdcoe.net, and that's JEWYL.CLARKE at sdcoe.net. I like to make everything complicated with spelling. Then I'd be happy to answer questions too and invite you to join. I think that's actually the first way to be part of it, is to join in on some of the things that I'm doing and then see if it's something that you want to replicate in your space. The first week of February coming up, I have another round of sector collaboration meetings where we'll be together. And so right now we're doing those quarterly. And just the next step too is to reach out to our stakeholders and say like, okay, if we do another one of these course development things in July or August, do you want to come? Are we going to have another 1,600 people wanting to come this summer? Wouldn't that be great? I think it's always, you always do that empathy work first, find out what your stakeholders need and are looking for. Look for other models. So come on over and like play in my sandbox and see what I'm doing, and then decide whether it's better to collaborate. And, we put our systems together and have more opportunities for teachers to work together, or replicate. And when I say, it's actually more like inspiration, not replication, right? So then you take the things maybe that I'm doing that would work for your system and build those out.
Well, Jewyl, I have to thank you for everything that you have done and everything that you have said. I am over here giddy and euphoric because you have preached to the choir in me, and yes, I will be attending what you have put together. And I encourage everybody out there, if you have the time and opportunity to engage in what Jewyl has put together for her district and her county, please do so, because it will benefit you tenfold. It benefited me, and obviously it benefited you by listening. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their time. Shannon, Derek, Jewyl, it's been awesome, and I couldn't thank you enough for joining us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation.